Welcome to the You on the Camino de Santiago podcast, Season 5. This podcast is for and about people getting ready for their first ever pilgrimage on the Camino de Santiago in Spain, France, and Portugal. With your host, Camino guide and longtime pilgrim, Nancy Reynolds of the Camino Experience. Nancy here with Season 5 of the podcast, Episode 2. In last week's episode, I gave you the setup for Season 5. This season will be all stories from pilgrims who have already walked the Camino. Most of them have already been on this podcast, so you have heard their before stories. Now you get to hear how it went, how they turned their pilgrim dreams into reality, and what reality looked like for each one. What I love about these stories is that no two are the same. They may have walked the same route in the same season, but each person walked their own personal pilgrimage. Each person discovered their pilgrim selves as they encountered and overcame challenges, and as they walked themselves deeper into their hearts and minds. There are lots of lessons to be learned this season. The first is that these stories won't be your stories. You will have your own unique experience on the Camino, and you will discover what you discover, learn what you learn, and do it your way. Are you ready to hear some pilgrim stories? We're going to start with Cinda, who walked the Camino Francés from Logroño to Santiago de Compostela with her trusty walker Percy, which, by the way, is short for perseverance. That is the perfect word for this pilgrim and this pilgrimage. Before we get to Cinda, I want to give an extra warm welcome to anyone tuning into the You on the Camino de Santiago podcast for the first time. Just to introduce myself, I am a longtime pilgrim and Camino Francés guide who loves to support people in getting started on their first ever Camino journey. I've been walking the Francés route since 2005, helping pilgrims get started since 2013, and in September this year, I will be leading my 15th group from Saint-Jean-Pied-du-Port. What a blessing to be with pilgrims as they plan and prepare for their pilgrimages, and then to bear witness to their first steps of this life-changing experience. If you would like to find out more about the services I offer to pilgrims walking the Camino Francés route, including my Getting Started audio guide, you can stop by my website, thecaminoexperience.com. And if you are tuning in for the first time and you discover you are inspired to walk the Camino de Santiago, I'd like to direct you back to Season 1 of this podcast. In Season 1, I walk you through your first handful of questions about walking the Camino, the questions you need to answer before you can begin planning for your pilgrimage. What is it? When is the best time to go? How long does it take? Where do pilgrims eat and sleep? Who do you go with? And how much does it cost? And interspersed with the long answers to these questions are stories of other first-time pilgrims who are right where you are, wondering if you can do this, if you can become a pilgrim on the road to Santiago de Compostela. Season 1, that's the place to be. Now let's get to Cinda. Cinda's story shows us that trail angels are everywhere. In fact, you might be a trail angel to someone on the way. What gifts do you have to give? Cinda shows us how training walks do and don't prepare you for the rigors of walking the Camino. She discovers the joy of movement and the delight of connecting with others who are headed in the same direction with similar purpose. And she shares with us the internal battle of taking a taxi or not, and how she resolved that for herself. That and more. Let's meet Cinda. Cinda, hi. Welcome back to the podcast.
Hi, Nancy. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing great. I have so been looking forward to this conversation, honestly, ever since our first conversation in season 4.
Yes, it was an incredible episode. I still have friends requesting links because they've heard about it, but they haven't been able to listen to it. And I want to listen to it again too. I thought about doing that last night, but I got too tired.
Oh, yeah. Well, I listened to it again this morning because I wanted to remind myself what I wanted to talk with you about. And I found myself so inspired when we got to the part about, if you have a dream, go after it now. I think that was my takeaway from our conversation. Do it.
I had a dream, and I was just reminded of that this morning on a call I was on, that I lived the dream. I had the dream for a long time, and I planned and I saved and I worked and I did it, and it happened. And
Okay. Well, we're going to get all the details. So let's do what I always like to do, put the pin in the map. I'd like to ask you this time around to share what you had planned to do, and then I'll ask you about what actually happened. So what was your initial plan, if you'll remind us what we learned about in the last episode?
sure, my plan was to fly to Madrid, take a bus to Logroño, and walk from Logroño to Santiago, and then take a bus to Fistere and spend 4 days at the beach, and then, start the journey home.
Okay.
That was my plan.
Okay. So what happened? What'd you do?
Well, I flew to Madrid. I did not make my bus connection. And that was a really sort of a traumatic time, because I spoke with about 10 different people at the airport who all gave me different directions how to get to the bus station. And the bus station's right at the airport.
It's really easy to find in Terminal 4.
Yes, but they had me going all over the place. So I missed my connection. But the woman at the bus station was really, really nice. She issued me a new ticket. She didn't charge me anything. I got on a bus at 2 something in the afternoon, and I got there about 7 in the evening.
Okay.
So it all worked out, but it was kind of a crazy day,
It sounds like it. Yeah. And especially when you land in Madrid, you're coming from a US time zone and your body is all confused as to where we are. What time is it? We've got jet lag. Plus, you may not have slept that well on the plane, so tired and jet lagged.
Right.
And then try to figure out something in another country.
Well, and I had a root canal the day before I left.
Oh my gosh.
Yes.
Was that a surprise? Was that a emergency?
It was an emergency.
Oh no.
But everything worked out okay, right?
Well, and that's the thing that we have to remember is that there are many planes, many buses, many trains that move around to and in Spain. And so we can always resolve things when they go bump.
Right. And if you're patient, I mean, it was frustrating to be told, go here, go on this elevator, go down here, go up there, but not to lose my patience,
Really impressive.
stay calm and know that I would eventually find it. And how I eventually found it is I started watching the buses, and I watched as far as I could see them, and I followed that. And then I waited for another one and followed it until I found the bus station.
So smart.
Right. Mhm.
I love that.
If you don't give up,
Well, and that's what I learned about you in our first conversation. You don't give up.
no.
Fabulous. Okay, so you got to Logroño, and then how many nights in Logroño?
I spent 2 nights in Logroño. The first day I thought was going to be a rest day, but I walked almost 20,000 steps around the town, and I had a blast. Right?
Logroño is so captivating and so beautiful.
I loved it. It's a beautiful town.
Yeah.
I love the people there, and walking in the streets and seeing people of all ages.
Mhm.
Older folks with their walkers, very different than my fancy walker. And that engaged a lot of conversation at times over my Camino. But, they were usually walking with a companion or a family member. I was able to engage in conversation with some of them. The families with children in the evening and late afternoon. It was just beautiful and comfortable, and I felt at home. Right.
I love it.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's my favorite. Well, I have many favorite things, but one of my favorite things about Spanish cities is that in the evening, people come out they come out and they're visible and they're engaged in their communities.
Right. Absolutely. I found that in many of the towns I was in, and even particularly in the large cities, Leon and Burgos and Saria. Right, right.
Wonderful. Okay, so then you walked from Logroño to Santiago,
Yes,
and you had, if I remember correctly, you had booked all your accommodations in advance.
I did.
Okay, how'd that work out?
Uh, well, my accommodations were excellent for the most part. But my big mistake was I booked my walking based on how I walked in Wichita. And walking in Spain, the trails were so different. They were more hilly
Mhm.
than what I thought. They were more rough than what had been described to me. And it was a challenge to walk that fast and that far, because there were days that I had planned to walk, 15 to 18 miles, and that was too far.
Those are big days.
Those are big days.
And those are big days for someone who is not using a walker. So let's make sure that everyone caught that in case they didn't listen to your first conversation. You were walking the Camino with a walker. Will you remind us why that was?
Yes, I walk with an all-terrain walker. It's made by a company called Trionics. It's a veloped, and it has four wheels. The two front wheels are alternating styles based on the type of trail you're on. And it allows me to walk because I have crushed vertebrae both in my lumbar and my thoracic area. And I am a 9% survivor from a brain aneurysm surgery. And the surgery caused my right leg to not function properly.
Okay.
And so I absolutely need the walker to walk any kind of distance.
Okay. Yeah. And so I remember when we talked and I was imagining the terrain and wondering, how is this going to happen? So when you came up against some challenges with the terrain and discovered it was not what you had expected or felt capable of navigating, how did you handle that?
With trail angels.
Yeah. Tell us about some trail angels.
Well, the first day I left Logroño, it was raining
Mhm.
and it was cold. And I walked through mud and had 3 inches of mud on my wheels.
Oh, my.
There were times that men would come along and they would grab a stick and they would scrape the mud off the tires to try and make it easier for me to push it, because when you're pushing, my walker empty weighs 27 pounds. With my day pack in it, it was probably 35 to 37, depending on how much water I had.
Okay.
And that's a lot of weight to be pushing through mud.
Sure is.
And so they would take a stick and they would scrape the mud off, and then I would walk another 100 yards and it would be covered in mud again. But it was at least nice for a little bit.
A little bit of a break there.
And then wow, I had so many trail angels. There was a time where I forget what hill it was. It's very rocky hill. It's a mountain to me.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very rocky. And when you reach the top, there's a cross on the top. It's not the Cross de Cruzera.
Okay.
It's another cross and it's big rocks that you're climbing up. And there was a man from Luxia who was walking beside me, and he decided to help lead me by guiding the front tire over the rocks and me pushing the rest. And it reached a point where we couldn't do that anymore. The rocks were too big.
Wow.
He asked me if I could walk the rest of the way up using my trekking poles, which were attached to the side of my walker. I said, I can try if I go very slow and take very careful steps, because it was rough terrain. And he said, because I'll carry Percy the rest of the way up if you can walk. And so that's what we did. And when we reached the top, he took pictures and videos of me. I carried 5 crosses made from palm branches from our Palm Service Sunday that my pastor gave me.
Lovely.
And I put one of the crosses at the foot of that cross. And so he took pictures of that. Then he walked with me down the rocky portion again till we reached the dirt. And my body just started shaking when we reached the dirt. And then I burst into tears.
Uh,
And they were tears of joy. They were tears. I mean, it was massive. It was like
it was waterworks, huh?
blood. Right, but it was tears of joy because I had accomplished a major feat. I mean,
Sure.
people in good health were struggling up that hill, that mountain, right?
Sure.
I did it, and I was in awe, And then another day out of Castro Jerez, I believe it is, where you go up the very steep hill, 12 degree grade up and 18 degrees down.
Yep.
I made that without help.
Wow.
I had people there to help me. They were watching out for me, but I did not need their help. And on the way down, my brakes were squeaking. Squeak, squeak, squeak. And, but that was another incredible achievement. There was another area. It was after Saria, but I don't know which day after Saria, where there's a river that you have to cross, and they have these blocks, concrete blocks like rocks. They're pretty narrow. And earlier, these two women had passed me, and when they crossed over, they stood there because they thought she's never going to make it over this. So when I got there, one of them came back and got my day pack out of the basket, and the other one guided the front wheel across while I folded up Percy as small as I could get her and carried her with tiny steps behind while the woman is guiding the front tire. Because even folded up, it was too wide for this narrow rock,
Wow.
And to me, that was Trail Angels. There's
Sure.
no doubt
Every
about it.
one of those stories, for sure. Yes.
And it just repeated itself over and over. There was another day into, what was the name of that town? A very steep mountain that you climb, very steep for a long period of time. Then after you get to the top, there's a cafe, and then you go down another couple of miles into the very small town where I stayed overnight. I can't think of the name of it right now. Shoot, it'll come to me.
Mm-hmm.
But a couple that I had met a few days before, they had passed me, and the man had shipped his backpack, and he was walking empty, and he said to his wife, "Give me your backpack and go back and get Cinda's pack so that she can push up the hill with a lighter weight." And so she came back and she took my backpack. Meanwhile, a guy I had met earlier in the day from Norway, he caught up with us, and he found a strap in his backpack that he was able to hook his trekking poles and make like a harness and wrap them around the front of my walker, and then take the foot of the trekking poles on his side, and he led up the way while I pushed behind. And it was hard for both of us. There's no doubt about it. It was hard,
Yes. Yes.
And I got to the top, and the owner of the shop was impressed. He had his wife take me the rest of the way to the town or most of the rest of the way. She couldn't drive the first because there were no cars allowed in this area. And when I got there and I walked to my hostel, you had to go down this ramp, down these steps, and then there was a sign on the door to go back to this other place to register.
Oh,
I
no.
thought, oh my gosh. So I had to go back up the steps, back up the ramp, back to the place. Turns out the place was closed, and I stayed at this other hostel. but it turned out to be a great night, and I had a great time, and it was awesome. But I just met people. I met a couple from Tasmania who we played, tag with. Back to the story of how I planned my trip based on my walking in Kansas. There was a day that I had walked 19.6 miles, and I still had 3 more miles to go. And I couldn't walk any further.
This was one of your training walks?
No, this was on the Camino.
This was in Spain. Okay.
When I planned my trip, it was based on how I walked in Kansas.
Okay.
It was based on using Google Maps to check the distance from point A to point B. That was not always correct. And so there were some days that I thought I was going to walk 15 miles that turned out to be 22 miles. And this was one of those days. And I had managed to walk 19.6 miles, and I didn't feel I could make it the rest of the way. And I had this big internal battle with myself, because one of the things I swore to myself, although I told people I would take a taxi, to myself, I swore that I would not take a taxi. So I had this big internal battle going on about spending, to walk 3 miles for me in Spain was more than an hour, probably 2.5 hours with the kind of terrain it was, or at least 2 hours. And I said, I finally gave in and called a taxi. And once I made that call and took that taxi ride, it relieved me of that internal battle. So there were a number of other days along the trip that I took a taxi either at the end or the beginning of a day to make my day easier, because I had scheduled such, I had 18-mile days.
Those are big days.
Those were big days. And it was more than what the people that were 25 and fit,
And without walkers and without crushed vertebrae.
Right. And yeah, right. Yeah. That was a big win, to achieve that. Right.
It's interesting. I want to talk about that for a second, because so many people do go with the intent to walk every step, not take a bus, not take a taxi. That is not a rule on the Camino, except for the final 100 kilometers. Somewhere along the way, this urban myth started that said, no, that's cheating. You can't take a bus or a taxi. But what you just shared with us really illustrates that those are self-assigned restrictions.
Right.
And not to be underestimated, though, because you had to go through a mental process to get yourself to change your paradigm about how your Camino was going to go. And you did it. And so I think it's really important to point out to people that it is your choice whether to do that or not. And you decide what it means.
Right. Right. And I still walked 424 miles.
Well, hello.
It's like, what would I have walked if I had done it all? It would have been, because I walked around the towns and stuff, and that added up. I kept track of my miles. And so, yeah, it was a big relief to be able to let go of that. And you did mention that you're supposed to walk the full Saria to Santiago. But if people want to say I cheated, because on my last day, I had to get to Santiago early because I had an important appointment in the afternoon, and that was to see my son.
Oh.
Yes, because he was doing the sound tech and he was production director for a band called the Interrupters. And there was a big 3-day music festival in Santiago the weekend that I arrived. And his band was performing the first day of it. So I had to get there early in order to have time to see the cathedral and, kind of mingle, and then get checked into where I was staying and get to the function, So I took a taxi for the first portion because I had a long day scheduled again. You know, it was like a 17-mile day. I could not do that and arrive early.
Right.
So I took a taxi part way, and then I was able to walk into the city. Oh, when I got out of the taxi and started walking, I did not have a sense of failure at having taken the taxi. I had a sense of great accomplishment. And I took each step with deliberate thought about all that I had done, all the people I had met, the people that, and I could cry right now because in the first 4 days, the number of people that came up to me and questioned why I was walking with a walker. And I tell them my story. They say, "Oh, you're such an inspiration. You inspire me. You're a legend. You're this, that." And then people would say, everyone's talking about you. You're known all over the Camino. And this one day I was standing on the path talking with a couple, and we heard someone yelling at us from behind, "Hey, you, I heard about you." And then he got closer. He says, "You've gone viral in South Africa."
Oh my gosh.
Oh, oh, I haven't. Yes, you have. Everyone in South Africa knows your story and is talking about you. This is a 45-year-old man. And his mother had reached out to him saying, "You've got to find her.
I love it.
Okay."
I love that.
It was phenomenal.
Yeah. How'd that feel for you? What was that experience like for you? Because you didn't go to be a
No,
celebrity.
no, I didn't. And in the first 4 days, that's why I mentioned the 4 days. The first 4 days, it was so hard to accept. It's like, no, I'm not. I'm just out. I'm just walking to celebrate my recovery. Well, that in itself, so, they said, that in itself makes you a inspiration. I said, no, I'm just celebrating that I'm alive. Well, that makes you an inspiration. And I just kept hearing it left, right, center. And then as people met me and they talked about me, other people that they talked to would come up and say, "Oh, I heard your story. Can you tell me more?" And it's just like, wow. But the first 4 days, it was really hard to accept. When I finally did accept it and own it and say, yes, I am an inspiration. Yes, I am a legend, yes, I am popular, and people care about me that I didn't expect to have all this love and sort of an adoration.
And admiration as well.
Uh-huh. And it turned out to be a great thing for me because it opened up a new me where I was interviewed by a school teacher from Ireland. He wanted to send a video to the substitute who was working for him while he was doing the Camino, so his students could hear about the possibility of dreaming,
Oh, yes.
you know. And so we stood on the path and he asked me questions and I responded, and he made this beautiful video that he sent to his class. And I saw him again a few days later. He says, "The kids love you." And so at some point, maybe I'll go to Ireland and I'll meet a handful of kids.
Well, I'm thinking a speaking tour might be in your future.
Yeah. And in one town, it was a small town, and I had had my dinner, and there was an ice cream shop right a couple of doors down from where I had dinner. And I got an ice cream, and I was sitting on the wall of in front of a building. And these little boys, 8 to 10 years old, came up to me. There were like 6 or 8 boys and 2 teachers, and they were practicing their English. And they wanted to interview me because they figured I spoke English. And so they interviewed me. And then at the end of the interview, I said, "I also speak Spanish." And they thought that was funny. It's like, and I have this really cool picture of them surrounding me because they fell in love with me, for a few minutes. And I just was able to be myself and relax, and have fun. And on the day entering Santiago, when you come down and you're about to go down the steps to where the bagpiper is,
Mm-hmm.
and there's that little tunnel. There was a big group of Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts. I mean, it was a Boy Scout troop, but there were girls in it too. And they were coming out. They were all Spanish. And they had heard about me. And so they were talking, you made it, you made it. And so I have this great picture, me surrounded by about 10 or 15 kids. And they all then wanted to touch my hand and shake my hand and slap me on the back. And it's just like so wonderful to be inspiring little ones as well as big ones.
Yeah.
And the families that walk the Camino. There were a number of families with even toddlers walking the Camino.
Yeah.
I was so impressed by that. It was amazing, And I was in a town. It was not yet time for dinner, but I was just walking down the street, and this woman walked past me, and then she turned around. She goes, "Hey, I heard about you." And she had 2 little kids. She was from Germany. She had 2 little kids, and she was walking the Camino with them, but she had heard about me, so she wanted to talk. It was just phenomenal. And so I got to share why I was walking, that I was living a dream, that I never gave up when I was in my recovery, that I took baby steps to get to where I was. And the walk was very challenging.
Yeah.
Physically challenging.
Yeah. And I think it's worth dwelling on that just a little bit.
Yeah.
I think people have ideas about what the Camino will be. They hear stories like this and stories of trail angels and Camino magic. And there's this idea that it's going to be all that 24/7. But the reality of walking the Camino is that it is really challenging, physically challenging, which brings a mental challenge as well, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. What was the mental challenge for you?
The mental challenge was to not give up. There were a couple of times when I was headed into Sahagún. That whole day was weird. I started off with great energy. It quickly went away. I walked for another hour and I got something to eat. And then I had new energy and I started out walking again. And very quickly the energy went away and it never came back. I walked the rest of the day dragging. And there was a group of mostly Spaniards. There was a French woman and someone from Holland, a group of friends that walk a week a year to do the Camino. And they were in a small bar cafe having a mid-afternoon Camino meal. And I started to walk by and I heard shouting. And so I went in and I had something to drink with them. And then I continued on and they met up with me again. And the leader of it, he went on, he turned around, he came back. He says, "Should I stay and walk with you?" I said, "No, I'm just going to take a rest here for a while. I'm okay." And he says, "Are you sure?" I said, "Yeah, I'm sure." So I let him go. Well, I walked on and I reached a park where there was a small church. And it turns out it's the halfway point between Saint Jean and Santiago.
Yes, Sagunes.
I didn't know that.
Okay.
I was so tired that day that I was oblivious. And I sat on one of these beautiful curved metal benches. And I sat and I said, "I can't take another step. I absolutely can't take another step." And I sat there and I almost started crying. because I was so exhausted. And then I started thinking, well, if you don't take another step, you're going to be here all night, and that's not going to be comfortable. And no one's going to come and get you. And so you got to take another step. So I forced myself to get up. And that's when I saw the two statues. I took a picture of each of them, but I didn't take a picture of, most people take a picture of them with the two statues, to mark the halfway point. I didn't know what I was even seeing. And I walked along. I finally reached the tarmac, and I plugged in the address to my hotel, and nothing came up. So I called the hotel, and I got this young woman on the phone. She only spoke Spanish. I was trying to describe to her where I was, and she couldn't figure it out. She asked me if I was near a train. I said, no, I don't see a train. And so then I said, and now get this. This is after I've told myself I can't take another step. I said, I'll just keep walking. That was so hard to say, but I had to say something. And then she got frustrated that she couldn't help me. I said, don't worry, I'll just keep walking. So I kept walking a pretty good distance, and I finally saw a train. So I knew I was on the right path. I walked further. I walked up this big hill. There's a hill every time you turn around.
Always. It's all up and down the whole darn way.
Always another hill. So I walked up this steep hill, and at the top of the hill was a big billboard with about 2-foot signs for multiple hotels and albergues and stuff. And I saw mine there with an arrow pointing to the right. So I turned to the right. I was able to get the address plugged in, but I still wasn't finding the hotel. And there was a man came out of a garden shop, and I asked him if he knew where the hell the hotel was. He says, yeah, it's just around there. So I followed his finger and kept walking. I still didn't see the hotel. I saw a building with the yoga instruction on it. I said, that's not it. And then I saw this very long, beautiful driveway. And I thought, I'm going to go up this driveway and see what I find. And there was the hotel at the end of the driveway.
Perfect.
Domus Via Torres. And a beautiful hotel. You walk in and they have a display. They have their own winery. So they have a display of all their wines and everything. And then I walked into the lobby, and the girl I had talked to had called the manager, and she was there waiting for me with a bottle of water and a glass. And she immediately poured me a glass of water. I drank it. I drank a second glass. And then she checked me into my room, which is all the way down around, multiple ramps and stuff. And she goes, I've given you one of our best rooms. And she opened the door, and it had a king-size bed,
Oven.
desk, and 2 chairs. And I was staying there 2 nights. And I was going to walk around the next day exploring Sahagun, but there was a big thunderstorm all morning. And so and part of the afternoon. So I just stayed in the hotel the entire day and just recharged.
So needed.
And that was almost a breaking point that day of saying, I cannot take another step. But once again, as you know me, I don't quit. And so I didn't quit, and I found my way, and the way led to something good, and a place where I could rest and recharge.
Well, this really is a walk of faith, isn't it?
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And the thing that I take away from that, Cinda, is once you're on the path, stay on the path. You may have to slow down. You may have to stop an extra night. You may have to take a longer break than you expect. You may have to spend a little bit more money than you wanted to get some help, but stay on the path.
Yes, I spent more money on taxis than I anticipated.
Yeah.
Put me over budget, but in the end, a friend helped me out with that. Yeah. And that was she wasn't on the trail, but she was a trail angel,
Yeah. Oh.
So
Yeah. And the thing I also am thinking about is you went with some physical challenges going into it, right? You
Yes,
arrived with your own set of physical challenges, and that brought a higher degree of difficulty, shall we say. But I also want to point out that just because someone doesn't have a physical challenge or a disability of some kind, that doesn't mean this is a easy breezy walk in the park.
absolutely.
Yeah. And I want to encourage people not to discount the challenge, the emotional, the physical, the mental, even the spiritual challenge, because they think they shouldn't have it because they don't have a disability or nothing traumatic has happened in their life. Being human is enough to work through to make this Camino happen.
Right, right. I consider very lucky and didn't have a single blister.
Very good.
But I met many people who had severe blistering and some who had to take days off to
Yeah.
let the blister heal.
Yeah.
And that was frustrating for them, but they had a choice. They could go ahead and keep walking and the blister's going to get worse and they
Yeah.
might end up losing a toe or losing part of their foot, or they could take a couple of extra days rest and let it heal and then walk.
How did you avoid having blisters?
Uh, I paid very close attention to my feet every day. And I have one toe that always has a big callus on it. And so I used moleskin. After a couple of days, I started using it every day and it stayed fine. On my right heel, I felt the blister coming on. I put some moleskin on it and the blister never formed.
There we go.
And I always carried in my day pack my emergency foot care Ziploc baggie. I never needed it, because I had prepared in the morning well enough that I didn't need it, but I always had it.
Perfect.
So that was important. The other thing I carried in my pack was a battery pack for my cell phone, which I only needed one day for myself, but I was able to let a couple of other people use it during the day when we were having a break and their phones were, almost dead. And so they could charge their phones while we had something to eat and a drink.
That is such a great point. Such
Yeah.
a great point. Someone has come to my rescue when I had my phone battery dying and they had a backup battery. And I remember we were actually probably about 5, 6 kilometers from Pamplona. And they said, no, keep it and we'll meet up in Pamplona. You can give it back. I mean,
Wow.
who does
Yeah.
that out in the
Right.
world?
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, right. Right. And that's the other thing. I haven't figured out how this is going to happen, but I keep thinking about it. On the Camino, people have a different mindset than many people in life, you know, and they're more open. The walls come down immediately, and people share intimacies with you when you barely have met them. I did, and I listened to many. And how do we bring that back to people who haven't been on a Camino, who have no desire to walk, 400 miles, but you don't have to walk in order to let down the wall? How do we get the wall to break down? Because I have quote unquote friends here in Wichita that I know very little about because they won't share, because they're afraid to share.
So, what is it about walking the Camino that has those walls come down? Any thoughts on that?
Well, I think part of it's the mentality of the people who decide they want to walk the Camino, but it's also the getting out in nature, the physical challenge. When you're undergoing a physical challenge, I think it's easier to let the walls come down, because you need, uh, I don't even know how to say it.
It's hard to explain.
Yeah.
A year or so ago, I came across a book called The Joy of Movement by Kelly McGonigal, PhD from Stanford. And she's just masterful at breaking this down. So I'm not going to do this full service, full justice. But what she says in her book is that movement is actually something that brings us together. And so when we are moving together with the same purpose, the same goal, something happens and the walls come down. That actually is a great connector. And I think some of it is when we're walking the Camino, we're looking ahead or down at the trail. We're not looking at each other. And that alone allows us to sort of feel a little bit safer because we don't have a penetrating stare looking at us, waiting to divulge our secrets. We just get into the rhythm of it, and that rhythm frees us up.
I understand what you're saying about when you're walking the Camino and people would come up to me and they had heard about me. They knew I was alone. They would ask, can I walk with you or do you want to be alone?
Nice.
I said, you can walk with me for as long as you're comfortable with it. I cannot go as fast as you go. And I like having company for a while, but I also enjoy walking alone, you know? And so that was nice on both parts, you know, to share that. Is it okay if I walk with you? You know?
It's really beautiful pilgrim etiquette. Yes.
Then there were times when my energy slowed down where I felt I was holding them back. And I said, you know what? It's okay for you to go on. You don't have to stay with me. I'm okay walking alone. And they would walk for a few more minutes and then they would say, okay, I'm going to go on. And I would see them in town that night, you know,
Yeah.
or I would see them the next day or whatever.
Yeah.
And it was awesome. But the first 4 or 5 days of my walk, you know, they had a very strange spring and it was colder and wetter and windier than usual. And there were a couple of days that I wore a muscle shirt, my long sleeve shirt, and then a short sleeve polo shirt and my jacket. And I was still cold because it was like 28, 30 degrees Fahrenheit, which is pretty cold.
That's pretty cold.
And it was windy and it was raining. And I was walking, you know, the hills out of Logroño and Navarrete and Najera and, you know, and those were long up and down, up and down. And I had 2 songs recorded on my phone by my pastor and a pianist. He played the guitar and sang. She played the piano. They recorded them for me after my sister passed away. I went on a trip to Mexico where I had been excluded from my sister's memorial service, and I was going to do my own memorial service at the beach there. It turned out that's when I got the food poisoning that became pneumonia, and so I never did a service, but I still had these songs. And one is called Servant Song.
Okay.
And it talks about walking and being a pilgrim on a journey. And I played that frequently when I was walking alone for long, long distances. And I also walked on my sister's birthday, and I walked on my 3rd anniversary of my brain surgery. So those were both emotional days.
Sure.
And this song was very emotional. But I also played this song for several people who really needed to hear this song. And it was so touching to do that and share that. And in one case, I wrote the words down and gave it to a woman. And I said, read this later when you're alone. I don't know if she ever did or not, but I have a feeling she did, you know, and that it made an impact on her because it's a powerful song.
Servant song?
Servant song, right, right. It's a contemporary Christian song.
Well, you know what you just described to me is you were a trail angel as well.
Yeah, I guess I was.
Yeah. You had lots of trail angels show up for you, but you showed up for other people as well, not just in inspiration, but also in directly giving gifts that only you could give to them.
Yes. And I took along 126 bookmarks that I personally drew. I gave almost every one away. And the people that I gave them to, it was touching. It was very touching at times to give them and to see the reaction. And I've heard from some of those people since, like, this bookmark means so much to me, and they would tell me why. And it was just phenomenal.
Well, giving is a very strong and powerful spiritual practice.
And the young Spaniard groups, I have a new name.
Oh, what's your new name?
It makes me laugh. It really makes me laugh. There's these pretty good sized groups of Spaniards in their late 20s were walking the Camino, and they fell in love with me, and they called me un animal.
I
Un
love it.
animal,
An animal. That's
Tu es
fabulous.
brute, right?
What's the second part?
Tu es brute, I am strong, right? You are strong, right?
I love it. Wow.
It was awesome. And I have a great photograph of this one day at a cafe, and this I had met on the trail earlier in the day, this group of Spaniards, and I don't know how I ended up ahead of them that day. They must have stopped someplace else, and then they stopped at the same place where I was having lunch. And the young man who was leading it, he came over and kneeled down beside me, and we had this very intense conversation in Spanish, and we were both crying. And then someone decided to take our picture, and the smiles that we have on our faces is just phenomenal, and those are kind of memories that you forget about for a while, but they come back,
Yeah. The moment you see that photo, it's right back there. We're right back in the moment.
It brings you such joy.
Yeah.
The day I arrived in Santiago, I thought my accommodation was a hotel right near the cathedral. It turns out it was a house in the suburbs, and I had to take a taxi there. And the
Oh,
further the taxi is going, the more upset I'm getting, because I think, oh, I wanted to be in Santiago, I'm getting sadder and sadder. And by the time we arrived and the woman who owned the house came out, I said to her, and I said it in Spanish, I said, I'm so sad. And I saw her heart break, and then I felt even sadder because it turned out to be a wonderful place and a wonderful experience. Her name is Paula. She's adorable. She's 39 years old. She's pregnant with her first child. She arranged for a taxi to take me to the concert. The taxi driver was supposed to stay or supposed to come back and bring me back to the house. And as he dropped me off, he says, I'm not coming back for you because I don't work that late. And so here we are. We had picked up another guy who I had met earlier on the trail, who his actually favorite band was the band my son worked for. So we both get out and wonder, I wonder how I'm going to get back. He can walk back because he's staying at a pretty close albergue. Well, my son left. Well, before he left, and I was waiting to see him, I was sitting, using my phone, trying to search for a way to get home and couldn't find it. And this guy standing next to me, he took off his jacket and wrapped it around me because he knew I was cold. And he says, what are you searching for? This is all in Spanish. I said, a taxi home. He says, don't worry about it. And I think, yeah, right. Don't worry about it. You don't need to find a way home. And so I kept searching. He says, I told you not to worry about it. So I quit searching. And then when my son showed up and he discovered that my son worked for the band, they were like great buddies. And my son had to leave before Green Day finished. And so the band finishes, and I'm sitting there and I'm wondering, okay, so how am I getting home? He said, don't worry about it. About 10 minutes later, he said, let's go. So he and his three buddies took me home. Turns out he was a retired officer for the Guardia Civil.
He took care of you. Took care of you.
Another trail angel, right?
Such good stories. Well, the way that I would like to wrap this up is I want to refer back to something you said in our previous conversation. you were talking about how you expected to feel when you took your first steps out of Logroño and how you expected to feel when you walked into Santiago. So would you share what was going on with you at with your very first steps and with your final steps on the trail?
Well, my very first steps were in the rain, and it was cold.
Yeah.
Oh, wow, this is not what I expected,
Yeah.
and the rain got worse for a while, and then it stopped. So the first day was it was it was an introduction. It's like, bam, you're here, you're doing this, and but I did not get wet. I mean, I got wet, but my body did not get wet because I had a proper jacket. It had a good hood, and my glasses stayed dry, and I was able to walk, and I enjoyed it. I absolutely enjoyed it.
Right.
Walking in the rain, walking in the mud, and seeing the country, and then the sun came out, and it was like, wow, it went from rain to sun
It does that.
periodically, right?
Yes. Yes. So how did it feel to walk into Santiago?
Ooh, if I could shout as loud as I felt inside, I would break your eardrum.
What was the emotion, Cinda?
It was one of astonishment, uh, thrill of achievement, spiritual growth that we haven't even talked about. I haven't talked about my spiritual growth with anyone yet. I am writing a meditation that I'll deliver at some point to my church. The changes that I felt in myself. One, I learned that I can do much more than I thought I could do. And so that's opened up a whole new avenue of things for me to do here in the US, and I'm thinking about doing a road trip if I can figure out a way to camp so I don't have to pay for a hotel. Hotels are too expensive in the US, and that was a blessing. The cost for accommodation, even with a private room, was, so far less than it is in the US, and I feel different every time I go someplace. I feel different because I know I'm capable of so much more, and I don't know what that much more is yet. It's still uncovering. I know that I'm working on 2 books. As I walked, people kept telling me I should become an inspirational speaker and I should write a book. I heard that more than 1,000 times. And I have really thought a lot about it. And then I'm writing a book, children's book. It's going to be called Come Walk With Me. And I'm going to illustrate it myself. And then I'm going to write a book for adults that's going to be illustrated with photographs and my story.
Okay.
The walk. I don't know what the name of that's going to be yet.
Okay.
That will be a combination of physical, mental, and spiritual story, But those are some of the thoughts that I had as I told you on that last day where I took each step with purpose. Till I was just almost there, and I met up with these 2 people that I was walking with when I actually entered the city or entered the cathedral area. But it was very meditative walk that day, and it was spiritual and physical and emotional, and I just felt like I was going to burst with the achievement. And when I finally reached Vistere, a couple of days later, I thought, wow, I really did this. I did this. I did this, that thought just keeps coming. I did this,
Yeah, you did.
Right.
You did. Let me go ahead and ask you then, Cinda, what would you say to someone who's considering walking the Camino and other first-time pilgrims? What would you say to them?
Don't be afraid to walk alone. You'll be safe. You'll meet people. People will care for you in ways that you cannot comprehend at this point in time in your life.
Yeah.
The other thing is engage in conversations as much as possible, as much as even if you're not comfortable with it at first, kind of force yourself out of your comfort zone, because then it will become comfortable, right? And you will meet people and make potentially lifelong friendships. I feel that's so true. And for me, if I were to do it again as a first timer or even as a second timer, I would add more days for walking
Take more time.
so that my distances were shorter each day, so that I had time to stop and explore more, like the day that I arrived in Santo Domingo. I was still on the trail, and a car from the Guardia Civil came up alongside me, rolled down the window, and said, "Tu es la última hoy día," which meant I was the last person on the trail that day. I knew I was, because I had been walking a long time without anyone passing me, because it was a long, hard walk that day. When I reached the tarmac, I plugged in my hotel. I had 44 more minutes to walk to get to my hotel. When I passed a cafe just before reaching my hotel, people were clapping for me. I said, I'll be right back. I'm going to check in, take a quick shower, come back for dinner. I got in, I took a shower. The water was cold. The only place I had cold water that whole trip. But I never got to see anything in that town. And that's where they have the cathedral with the roosters and stuff, because in the next morning I left before it was open.
Okay.
And that, to me, that was my mistake in planning how far I could walk in a day. And so I would encourage people to, if they think they can walk so far in their normal environment, to shorten that for Spain.
It's really good advice. Yeah, really good advice. And how many days total did you take?
I was gone for 42 days, but I walked 29 of them.
29 days. Okay. One of the things that I advise first-time pilgrims, and it's actually in my top 10 tips that I give away, is don't rush the start. But what I actually want to say to people is don't rush any of it.
Right.
Give yourself the time to have the journey of a lifetime.
Yes, right. I mean, if I had added 5 days of walking, that would have made the trip so much different,
Sure. Yeah.
But I'm also glad that, other than the day in Logroño that I walked 20,000 steps and it was supposed to be a rest day, I did have my other rest days where I only walked, like 3 miles around town, and 3 miles is nothing compared to walking 15,
Yeah.
But yeah, make sure that you have rest days and that your days are shorter. An occasional long day is okay, but not consecutive back-to-back long days.
Yeah. That's my way. That's my way of doing it. Cinda, we've covered a lot of ground here today, and I'm really very grateful to hear your stories. I was so inspired when you were heading over, and even more inspired now. And I hope people who listen to this episode realize that they can do this, whether you do it alone, whether you do it with a group, whether you book everything in advance, whether you don't book a darn thing, you can do this.
Yes, you can do it however it fits for you.
Yeah.
But just do it. If it's in your heart to walk, to have quiet time with yourself, to have time to explore new friendships, just do it. Just do it.
Just do it. All right. Dream big, dream again, and go make those dreams a reality.
Yes. Dream and live the dream.
Perfect. Cinda, thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming back on the podcast.
Thank you.
All right.